Everything shifted on an ordinary Wednesday morning. I was tidying the den, one of those mornings where golden light pours through the windows, illuminating tiny particles floating lazily through the air. The fragrance of pine cleaner blended with aged paper created a comforting atmosphere. I was murmuring a melody under my breath, adjusting throw pillows and repositioning photo displays, when the entry door swung wide, bringing that recognizable squeak and the subtle scent of my son-in-law, Marcus. He carried that fresh athletic facility fragrance today, mingling with the traces of urban life beyond our walls. He'd just returned from running errands across town. "Hello there," he said, resting comfortably against the entry, gripping a shopping sack. His manner was relaxed, yet there was an unusual hesitation in his speech, as though he was contemplating whether to voice something, weighing on his mind. I grinned and gestured for him to enter. While he placed the sack on the kitchen surface, I observed him examining the space with fresh attention, noticing the subtle elements I'd always thought he overlooked. The tilted lamp covering, the modest stack of periodicals beside the couch, the hairline fractures across the center table. "You catch every detail," he murmured, almost speaking to himself. Then he stood upright and posed a question that stunned me entirely. "Do you ever sense that you're concealing a piece of who you are, something you've kept hidden from everyone?" My hand stopped mid-motion with the cleaning cloth. His voice carried a weight, not uncomfortable but profound, almost pressing. This wasn't casual chit-chat or surface-level conversation. Yet there was something deeply considerate in his delivery, as though he was creating space for honesty without criticism. I set the cloth aside and indicated the couch. "Perhaps I have," I confessed gradually. "I believe everyone does somewhat. What brings this up?" He adjusted his position, tapping his fingers softly on the sack he'd lowered. "I'm not certain. Recently I've realized existence is too brief to silently carry burdens, and occasionally expressing them to someone who genuinely pays attention. It transforms everything." That straightforward acknowledgement unlocked something within me I hadn't recognized I'd been guarding. There was an unexpected closeness filling the atmosphere, not amorous, but gentle in a manner that surprised. The sort of instance that feels like two spirits grazing each other's authentic selves, even when connected through kinship and mutual regard. I understood then that this transcended mere dialogue. It was an invitation, a precious, delicate opportunity to examine something more meaningful with someone I had faith in. The space felt somehow cozier, the sunshine more brilliant against the worn floral drapes. I discovered myself speaking truthfully, revealing my disappointments, my modest victories, the silent anxieties I'd never expressed because they appeared too minor. And Marcus paid attention, not merely hearing words, but truly absorbing them, occasionally nodding, his focus never drifting from mine. When I finally paused, a tranquility had descended upon both of us. It was the variety of stillness that isn't hollow. It's substantial, vibrant with comprehension. And I recognized in that instant that something had transformed between us, and likely within me as well. Following that afternoon, the residence felt altered, somehow less heavy. I couldn't fully articulate it, but whenever I passed the den, the sunshine streaming through the slats appeared clearer, the floating particles moving more like they were honoring something. Marcus had departed an hour prior, yet his inquiry remained in my thoughts, reverberating softly. "Do you ever sense that you're concealing a piece of who you are?" Over the following days, I discovered myself observing details I'd missed before. A groaning in the wooden planks that brought childhood afternoons spent moving quietly through my family's residence. The manner the drapes rippled in the late afternoon wind, bringing the delicate fragrance of the garden beyond. Even my own speaking voice seemed transformed when I vocalized passages from literature, more intentional, more prepared to extend and explore the edges of my own emotions. Then one twilight, Marcus visited again. He was holding a modest box of confections, his demeanor casual, yet with that same silent depth in his gaze. "I figured you'd appreciate these," he said, offering them over. "No particular occasion, just wanted to drop by." I chuckled quietly, setting the box onto the center table. "You're treating me too well," I said, though I didn't mean it regarding material items. There was something reassuring in his company, a consistent warmth that brought to mind extended discussions with cherished friends, when time decelerates and you lose track of hours. We remained together in silence briefly, absorbing the soft hum of the cooling unit and the faraway sounds of vehicles beyond. And then, almost tentatively, he spoke. "I've been reflecting on what I questioned the other evening, about concealing pieces of ourselves. Sometimes I believe we tuck things away not from embarrassment but from worry that someone won't truly comprehend." I acknowledged slowly, sensing my throat constrict with a sensation I couldn't precisely identify. "Yes," I breathed, "precisely that." It was in that instance I grasped how deeply I'd yearned to be perceived, genuinely perceived beyond the surface layers of my existence. The meal preparation, the housekeeping, the minor social courtesies I executed mechanically. Marcus wasn't criticizing, wasn't attempting to repair anything. He was simply there, establishing a refuge where I could expand without apprehension. We began conversing quietly initially about matters that appeared minor, literature we enjoyed, recollections of the metropolis he matured in, my own remembrances of summer months as a child. But gradually the discussion intensified. We exchanged minor regrets, understated yearnings, things I had stored away even from my own daughter. And in those instances, the residence seemed to contract around us, becoming more personal, more vital, as though it also wished to absorb. When he departed that twilight, I experienced an unusual blend of expectancy and serenity. Something was evolving inside me. Something tender yet persistent, a flame of self-exploration I hadn't anticipated. I grasped that connection, authentic connection. Doesn't always declare itself with spectacular displays. Sometimes it arrives silently through an expression, an inquiry, or simply existing when someone ventures to voice their reality. And for the initial occasion in years, I sensed like I was no longer concealing myself, not because existence required it, but because I chose to. The days that came next felt suspended, like I was moving in a gentle mist of consciousness. Marcus's visit had left a subtle impression on me, and I discovered myself noticing everything more intensely. The manner the sunshine created amber bands across the floor covering, the faint aroma of night-blooming flowers from the garden floating in through the raised windows, the measured ticking of the aged wall timepiece that had always occupied the den, but abruptly felt like a pulse I could perceive. It was a Saturday dawn when he visited again. He didn't announce himself this occasion. He just entered with that natural confidence that emerged from years of knowing me as kin, yet somehow entering a fresh, delicate territory between us. "I figured you might enjoy some companionship," he said, leaning naturally against the entry. His tone was gentle, yet there was that silent depth in his gaze once more. We relocated to the couch, and I served us each a cup of herbal infusion, the vapor rising in gentle coils above the vessels. The silence was pleasant, like a thoroughly used covering that somehow carried warmth and confidence. We started discussing the minor matters initially. Recipes we treasured, films we recalled from previous eras, but shortly the discussion drifted to more intimate ground. "You realize," Marcus said softly, following the edge of his vessel with a fingertip, "I've always respected how you maintain this household. But I wonder, do you ever contemplate what you genuinely desire? Not for others, solely for yourself?" This inquiry struck me surprisingly, and I discovered myself wavering. I grasped I had devoted so many years progressing through existence for others, my children, my companions, my occupation, that I scarcely remembered my own aspirations. My heartbeat quickened somewhat, not with alarm, but with an unusual enthusiasm. I'm uncertain," I confessed genuinely. "I suppose I've been reluctant to even pose that question to myself." Marcus acknowledged, his expression gentle yet constant. "It's acceptable to be reluctant, but sometimes simply asking the question can reveal pathways you didn't realize were there." And in that instant I sensed something shift within me. A portion of me that had been silent, buried beneath pattern and duty, awakened. I started to reveal things I hadn't vocalized aloud in years, aspirations I'd abandoned, the literature I had desired to compose, the destinations I had wished to explore but never attempted, and Marcus absorbed it, genuinely absorbed it, not disrupting, not evaluating, simply creating space for my expressions to exist. The more I expressed, the more vital I felt. The pressure I hadn't grasped I'd been bearing started to dissolve, replaced by a gentle warmth, a sensation of being perceived and comprehended in a manner I hadn't encountered in decades. And as the afternoon sunshine angled across the space, catching in the delicate lines of his features, I experienced a bond that was tender, considerate, and deeply human. We didn't accelerate anything. There were no elaborate displays, no theatrical declarations, just silent instances of awareness, amusement at minor memories, and the variety of discussion that penetrates your core and creates a sense of being less isolated in existence. When he departed that day, I felt as though I had uncovered a concealed portion of myself, a section of my spirit that had been waiting silently for someone to recognize it. That twilight, as I moved through the den, the sun descending behind the foliage beyond, I grasped that my residence didn't feel like merely a location anymore. It felt like an observer, a companion to my realization. And somehow, in exchanging these silent, exposed instances with Marcus, I had started to rediscover not only myself, but the subtle magnificence of connection, the variety that doesn't announce itself, but murmurs and remains long after it's vanished. The weeks progressed gently, almost invisibly, yet each encounter with Marcus left its impression. It wasn't about elaborate displays or theatrical revelations. It was the minor things, the silent instances of comprehension, the manner our discussions remained long after he had departed. I started to observe a fresh pattern in my days, a subtle buoyancy in my movement, a gentle forbearance in the manner I progressed through the residence. One afternoon, I was reorganizing volumes on the den shelving, the afternoon sun creating warm bands across the floor covering. Marcus arrived holding a modest journal. "I figured we could exchange something," he said, somewhat hesitant. "Just a minor endeavor if you're willing." I smiled, intrigued, and we positioned ourselves on the couch with tea, the silent comfort of the space enveloping us like a familiar wrap. We started recording thoughts, contemplations, aspirations we had stored away. It felt remarkably personal, not in a physical manner, but in the way our thoughts wove together, the way our expressions occupied spaces that had once been voiceless. As we recorded, I grasped something profound. This bond with Marcus wasn't about attraction in the traditional manner. It was about acknowledgement, about two individuals honoring each other's internal existence, about establishing a refuge where exposure could exist without alarm. And in that refuge, I uncovered bravery I hadn't grasped I possessed. The bravery to embrace my own narrative, my own realities, without concealing them from the world. Later that twilight, after Marcus had departed, I remained in the den, the diminishing light spilling across the furnishings, and experienced a deep sensation of appreciation. For the initial occasion in years, I felt completely present in my own existence. I reflected on the inquiry he had posed that day. Do you ever sense that you're concealing a piece of who you are? I grasped that I had been concealing myself not from embarrassment but from custom. And now, gently, silently, I was permitting those portions of myself to exist. I comprehended then that connection, the variety that reaches the spirit, doesn't always arrive loudly or theatrically. Sometimes it emerges softly, like a breeze contacting your surface, subtle yet undeniable. And when it does, it possesses the capacity to transform the manner you perceive yourself and the world surrounding you. As the darkness settled in and the residence grew silent, I served myself a final cup of tea and remained by the window. The celestial bodies were starting to appear, remote and constant, and I grasped that, just like the celestial bodies, certain instances in existence radiate silently, yet their illumination endures far longer than you might anticipate. That twilight, I didn't feel isolated. I felt perceived, comprehended, and vital in a manner I hadn't in years. And I recognized without question that the surprising bond I had uncovered with Marcus had revealed a passage not just between us, but within myself, a passage to authenticity, to bravery, and to the silent fulfillment of being genuinely present in my own existence. And for the initial occasion in an extended period, I accepted it completely.